Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to me, for being here. I understand you have a whole day of presentations, of breakout sessions, of signing a memorandum of understanding. Congratulations with that. And here I am. I believe I'm the last speaker of today. So I'll be quick. I have 20 minutes to present to you something hopefully new, a new way of looking at things. Hopefully something you will disagree with, so we can continue the discussion when we have a drink outside. My name is Lucas Simons. I'm Dutch. I'm 43 years old. I'm living in the Netherlands, and I'm sort of a serial entrepreneur. I like to set up new businesses or new initiatives that try to tackle complexity, sustainable complexity, from a business point of view and from a systemic point of view. In a past life, I used to be the director of UTZ Certified, a label. Who is familiar with that label? A few. Normally when I ask this in a room, then two people raise their hands and then one is completely wrong about what UTZ is. But indeed, UTZ, it's a reasonable, a successful initiative, a mainstream certification program that is all about sustainable coffee, cocoa, a little bit in tea. We introduced traceability models back in 2002. So that is what got me hooked on agriculture. I love the sector. It's also my background in Wageningen University, but that sector has something to it. It's dirty, it's real, it's sweaty, dirty fingernails, that kind of things, and it's the most beautiful product, right? This is it. This is the real economy. And so I do a lot of speeches, I do a lot of teaching at business schools about the food sector in general and why there's such big sustainable issues, and then trying to use agriculture for them as a way to think about complexity in general. Because if you listen to what's going on in coffee, you think, oh, these guys are crazy, gee, get your act together. But meanwhile, they're thinking about their own sector where you see similar patterns and similar loops and similar phases of maturity. And so I'm doing a lot of these kind of conversations with students, using agriculture as almost the theoretical or the textbook model of failing markets. And so I read in your agenda that today is, besides doing more research and working together, also was this little word, transforming markets. And of course that immediately got my attention, because that's what we do. I have a consultancy business now called New Foresight. We work with sectors where we help them to migrate from one maturity phase to another. I know that you're discussing cocoa today, and I know Harold is here. We are facilitating Cocoa Action, for example, if you heard about it. The 11 largest companies coming together, trying to figure out what does sustainability mean for us, and how do you reset the way cocoa is being produced in West Africa. We have done similar work in coffee. We have done similar work in cut flowers. We work a lot with IDH. So these are big programs that we facilitate and help to move sectors along. Another one of my companies is Scope Insight. Perhaps some of you have heard of it. It's a sort of a social enterprise, for profit, for purpose, where we are crazy enough to introduce credit rating for farmers in Africa. So if you know how good they are, then you know their strengths and weaknesses. You can say that's the type of capacity building they need, help them with this, build their track record in rating, segment them in better and less good farmers, and link them to finance, inputs, insurance companies, etc. And starting as an idea 5 years ago, it started to slowly become something of a bigger movement. Had the pleasure and honor to get some international titles of World Economic Forum and a Ashoka Fellow, and author of the book Changing the Food Game, which is waiting for you. At the end of this event, I believe when you step out, there's a big pile of books, and please take a copy, because that's all about systemic change. How do you transform markets? There is a strategy to it, but you need to start understanding the loops, and you need to start recognizing the patterns. So, like I said, we work in a lot of sectors already. I think we've worked in 16 different sectors. And you would be a fool if you don't start to see patterns between them. And of course, every sector that you work with will say, yeah, that works in coffee, but us, cotton, that is completely different. Or cocoa, pff, now we're talking. Or cut flowers, that is really difficult. Probably you would agree with me that yes, there are differences, but there are also something similar. There are similar reactions and patterns and bottlenecks there. And so what are those? And that is the secret of market transformation. And the best way to explain that is with this. These are my beautiful kids. They're 6, although the youngest will be 7 in 2 weeks' time, 8 and 10. This is on our last holiday in Italy. And for those of you who have kids, probably you will recognize them. They look alike a bit, same hair color, same eye color, same father and mother. But they're completely different. Don't you recognize it with your own kids, that their personalities are completely different? And so at least my kids are completely different. And so although they look the same, they are completely different. But if you take a step back, then you would also recognize that once they grow up, they go through similar phases. And you also know that if you raise them well, they have a better chance of becoming a good citizen and a successful human being and happy. And if you don't raise them well, there's a bigger chance that they are ending up at the other side. And so, although they're different, they might respond to the similar forces and dynamics. And although I've not experienced it yet, I think based on these patterns, I can foresee the future. Because who can tell me what will happen with my oldest daughter over there she's 10 years old now, in 2 to 4 years' time? What will happen? Sorry? It would be more hectic. Exactly, it would be more hectic. And I get a lot of warnings from parents, oh my God. So it's the big teenager age, and they all go through it. And so despite their differences, they're going through similar phases of maturity, of growing up. And even the teenager phase, the puberty phase, if that is a good English word, has a very important role to play for an individual to grow up, so that after that, they can become a young adult or wise adult. And so every phase has its importance, has its need, and one phase is needed to prepare for the others. And so let's keep this in the back when we look at agriculture. And I have to say, I was pretty nervous to stand here, because normally I stand in front of groups of students or people who have no idea what I'm talking about, and then it's easy. But you guys are the elite here, right? You know everything about agriculture. You are experts on all the different aspects. So I expect a lot of pushback from you. So I'm not challenging your knowledge. I recognize my superiors here. But I'm the guy who likes to keep things simple. And so I'm the guy who asks, how come, despite the billions and billions of dollars that we poured into these agricultural sectors, they're still poor? How come, despite all of our efforts, bilateral support with governments, NGOs, research organizations, whatever we're doing, working with companies, giving them a lot of money, still environmental degradation? Apparently we're not very good at solving the problem. Would you agree? Something bigger is going on apparently, because it's not lack of intention, it's not lack of motivation, it's certainly not lack of money and good ideas. I mean, you're making a profession out of this. Am I sorry? That was really a slip of the tongue. No, really. So, what is going on? And we've heard, I sat into a couple of meetings today, and we talked about smallholders and bottom of the pyramid. I think it's even there on the board. And so we sort of have a mental map in our mind that agriculture is a triangle, where you have a bottom of the pyramid with subsistence farmer and poor and unorganized and oh my God. And there's a top of the pyramid where they're well organized and efficient, and there must be something in the middle there, right? SME or whatever. And so that looks like this. But that's only happening in a few sectors, we learned. Because if you map this out to what is the economic performance of a sector, not of a farmer, but of a sector, that is organized like a pyramid, but at the other side you're mapping their potential to change, to become sustainable from an environmental point of view, social point of view, and economic point of view, what we learned is that you don't have one archetype of sectors, you got actually 5. And they look like this. You have sectors that are only bottom of the pyramid, right? Cocoa, West Africa is one of them. Cotton in India is another one. They are hardly well-organized farmers. And of course you're going to tell me, yes, I know one. Yes, I know one too. But in general, the hundreds of thousands of farmers are unorganized bottom of the pyramid. Now, if I would tell you soy Brazil, are we talking about smallholders here? It's bigger, 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 bigger. They're competing on a different scale. So there you got there's only top of the pyramid. And there are also sectors there where you're either very big or you're very small. There's hardly anything in the middle. Palm oil, Indonesia, for example. And then there are those who, where you have mostly SMEs. You have some big ones, some small ones, but it's more an SME-driven sector. That's interesting. Different archetypes of sectors. Now, why is that interesting? Because you are fantastic in coming up with what the farmers must do. They must have better micronutrients. They must be climate smart. They must preserve their soils. They must become certified, food safety, gender. I'm forgetting probably a list like this, what they must do in order to become better. But if you are in a sector that is bottom of the pyramid, where there are almost only farmers who cannot read or write, then what is their absorption for all of your brilliant ideas? It's very low. Well, if you have a sector like this, bigger, 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 they probably hire McKinsey to figure out what they should be doing. And so each archetype of sector has their own absorption capacities for your brilliant solutions. And so it makes sense to, before we start figuring out what they should or must be doing, to figure out what determines their absorption capacities, what enables or what drives a cocoa sector or cotton sector, no matter what we seem to be doing, to remain a flat pyramid. What's happening there? And like I said, just with my kids, they may differ, but they have similar driving forces behind them. And in 5 minutes' time, I'm going to make you God. You are able to play around and foretell the outcome of the game. By the way, let me tell you this, right? You know the game Monopoly, right? You've played it probably once or twice in your life. What's the outcome of that game if you play it long enough? Sorry?
Monopoly.
Monopoly.
You go to jail.
That is, well, that's at least once, yeah, that's interesting. That's a very good answer. It's usually one wins and the rest loses, right? That was the answer I was looking for. But yeah, and that person goes to jail, right? So the why, no matter how often you play it, that's the outcome. And so does it matter during that Monopoly game to say, oh my God, you're losing, here's some money? Does it help? No, one wins, the rest loses. Does it help to become angry? My son gets furious. You saw him when he plays and he loses, oh my God. He will throw with dice and will stop playing. Does it help? One wins, the other. So the rules of the game determine the outcome of the game. There are rules that determine the outcome of this game, but you need to see them in order to understand them. And there are 4 forces that drives the archetypes, these 5 archetypes. Depending on the constellation of these forces, this is the outcome of that game. Let's see what they are. Oh, let me introduce some words here. Competing on poverty, bottom of the pyramid. Competing on efficiency, top of the pyramid. Competing on quality, the diamond shape, and sort of hybrid models. Now, by the way, why is that green circle or the green line there? Is because an SME-driven sector, not a bottom of the pyramid sector, and not a everybody's bigger, bigger, bigger monocropping type of sector, but SME-driven primary agriculture ticks a lot of boxes from a sustainability point of view. There are good business cases, or there's a potential for good business cases. The people can actually make money and have an income. You can fit it in biodiversity zone. There's the most employment. This is quite an interesting model. And so one of the questions you could ask yourself is, how do you change the archetype from bottom of the pyramids to more SME-driven sectors, to more diamond-shaped sectors? And so this is where these forces come into play. So there are 4 forces that drives the archetype of the sector. The first, again, please remember, I like to keep things simple. So this is not a whole scientific study behind it, although we did look into it whether or not this is correct. The first one is, how difficult is it to be a farmer? Is it easy or difficult? How difficult is it to be a cocoa farmer? Do you need to have a university degree? Do you need to have a lot of money? Do you need to have a lot of investments there or certain knowledge or skills? Well, actually, it's quite simple. I'm not saying it's not hard work, but anybody can be a cocoa farmer, anybody does. Children do it, men do it, everybody can be a cocoa farmer. The same thing is with cotton. It's not difficult to be a cotton farmer. And so low barriers to enter, low barriers for success. I'm not saying it's easy to be a good cocoa farmer. That requires training and that requires knowing what you're doing. But anybody can be a cocoa farmer. That's one. The other one is, and the industry always kills me for that one, what do markets reward? Are they going for the lowest price, I don't care where it comes from as long as it's lowest price? Or do we reward quality, whatever that is? That could be product quality, taste, flavors, could be safety, could be certification. What is the quality that we're actually rewarding? Or is it we're driving down prices? What does it mean for soy, for example? Are we rewarding quality or are we... Is that my warning? Okay, then I need to speed up. Are we rewarding quality or are we rewarding lowest price? Well, normally you would say lowest price. And for many commodity sectors, it's lowest price, although for some, we actually reward qualities. This is the specialty markets or flowers or other things. There are ways to reward quality in the market. The other one is, in what kind of enabling environment does it take place? Is it, are we helping the farmer? Do we give them what he needs, supporting support, or are we taxing them and leaving up to his fate? And I think we all know examples of where things are going pretty well and where things are not going well. And then the last one, and this always gets me into fight with NGOs. Do they have an alternative? Can they get out? Can they get away from agriculture to the city somewhere, do something else, become a worker but don't remain a farmer? And now, play around, and I have to hurry up. Play around with these forces. What happens if everybody can be a farmer, if markets reward the lowest price in a failing enabling environment and people cannot get out? What is the outcome of this game? It's a flat pyramid where people compete on poverty with each other, no matter what you do. If it is very easy to be a soy farmer, the market goes for the lowest price, but the government actually supports it quite fiercely and make sure that many people are out of the agricultural sector, they're no longer living there, the sector can compete on efficiency and becomes to grow bigger and bigger. And you know the two because there where the government is not doing their job or farmers cannot get out, like India soy, we're going back to the competing on poverty model. And so you can, depending on how you play around with these constellations, you can change, you can predict the outcome of that game, the archetype, and you can predict the problems that we will have. Because in a flat pyramid, it's poverty, it's child labor, it's malnutrition for sure. In an inverse pyramid, it's deforestation, land grabbing, aerial spraying, and these kind of things, right? So you can play around and predict quite accurately what is the outcome of this game. And if this is true, if this would only be half true, then what are we doing? Then why are we training farmers in a flat pyramid? Because that is not a solution. Why are we spending a lot of time on research while we know that the absorption capacity is very low? So it's that kind of fragmented thinking that keeps the situation many times as it is. I'm not saying it's not useful, because we do need more research and we need more training and we need more funding, etc. But it needs to be done with a holistic understanding behind it. I will go very quickly through it. And so then the question is, of course, can we then not organize ourselves? Again, think of these kids. They go through several growing phases. And what we've learned, and this is actually what will be in the book, is there are 4 phases of market transformation, and every one of us and every sector goes through them. The first phase is, there's a big crisis. It could be child labor in cocoa, the big forest fires in palm oil. We all know these crises. And the very first reaction, always, when this crisis hit the media, come out big time, is, no, we didn't do it. It's not our fault. It's a one-off. Yeah, it's coincidence. It's a disease. It will go back to normal. When the crisis hits back, or when the campaign is being effective, then we're going to the first phase of market transformation, and that is that we, on a massive scale, start projects. We start foundations, charities, we will train farmers, we have very nice pictures, and before you know it, we have an industry of where everybody does their little thing. There's little cohesion in it, but this is where, very important, we learn what works and what doesn't work. This is the famous let 1,000 flowers blossom, if that is the good, proper expression. The second phase is when somebody figures out to use this best practice and turn it into a movement, to turn it into or link it to the competitive advantage of the market. For example, certification was very successful there. It was not that useful in other cases, but one thing it did very well is linking market interest in driving down better practices into the field, because now we could label it and we can compete with each other. And if first movers join you, then you know one thing for sure in the industry, that second and third and fourth movers will imitate but never follow, because they will do something else. And that's why we have UTS and Rainforest Alliance and 8 different labels in coffee. We have 6 or 5 in cocoa. We have 15 in cut flowers. It's all because of this competitive game of trying to differentiate. But meanwhile, we're not solving the problem, but this is the puberty phase. We have to go through that phase of saying, no, 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 we are different and we are trying to do this by ourselves. But the problem keeps coming back. And then you're going to the third phase. And this is where you're organizing yourself differently at some point, where the industry and other stakeholders are saying, we're throwing a lot of money at this problem, but it's not going away. Perhaps we should work together. And I know this is only true for the industry. It of course not happens in the research world, where you're immediately trying to cooperate. Or perhaps you're going through the same phases of doing projects, then going into competition with each other, and then at some point join together in a large consortium where you say, you know what, where should we work together on? It's a very important phase that every sector goes through. And so also the industry. And this is where Cocoa Action or the coffee industry or many other sectors that we're currently working in, where people are coming together and saying what is competitive, so we can beat each other up in the market, and what is non-competitive, and we should work together with government, with research, with NGOs. Very, very important maturity phase. And then in the last point, you get where governments or other authorities can take their role and say, from now on it will be law, or this will become our policy. Yes. And so, if you look at different sectors and topics, you can map them out where they are. Agricultural finance is very much at the beginning. There are many projects at the moment. There are first attempts to actually make it competitive, but there are a lot of projects. Climate smart is also somewhere in the project phase. Then you got some sectors, floriculture, soy, agroforestry, are very much in that one standard against another standard thinking. Yes, we have round tables, but it's only about the standard and because we don't accept other standards. That is typical thinking for phase 2. Then there are some sectors who are moving on to the third phase, which is, for example, palm oil, who start to say, you know what, yes, we have RSPO, but can we not also recognize other standards, and we use the platform to actually change the agenda? What is our vision for sustainable palm oil sector? Now that is, now somebody matures out of the puberty phase. Then you have some examples of coffee and cocoa, where the industry is already coming together and has asked themselves the question, where should we work together on, what is the non-competitive agenda, while we still compete on sustainability. And there's one, and I had hoped to make it a surprise, but it's already there. The eggs is already in the fourth phase. Did you know that every egg that is being produced and consumed in the European Union needs to be at least free range? It no longer can be a battery egg. And so they went through, you probably recognize all the different labels that we've had, and then they come together, and now this become law. It's only for consumption within the European Union. If it's for export, then you can still do battery eggs, of course, because that would be false competition. But so here, and there are many, many other examples that have already gone through the fourth phase. And the interesting thing is, this is not just true in agriculture. We have looked at many other sectors where, and they all seem to deal with complexity, where the problem is bigger than each individual can solve by themselves, going through these different, like kids, maturity phases. And the good news is, you can organize this. You can initiate it. You can accelerate it. But you have to go through all of these phases. If there's a sector still in denial, wait for a good crisis and kick off the project phase. Let 1,000 blossoms flower. Then try to link it to competitive advantage so that you can actually link it to the market forces and let industry compete on it. After a while, organize the first movers and the leaders and say, okay, what is competitive and what is non-competitive, and work with governments and research. This is not just true for industry. I would argue also research goes through these same kind of maturity phases. So, one more thing, and then one more minute. One plea is that what we find is that while we go through these maturity phases, there is a screaming lack of business model thinking. So we have the most perfect list of what farmers should do. But when we calculate what it does for the farmer, they go bankrupt. Yes, the farmer should should use fertilizer, but if they buy it, they go bankrupt. You can calculate that. Yes, they should replant. I completely agree, because they're old trees. But if you do, they go bankrupt. And so what we see is that we come up with brilliant solutions, but from a farmer business point of view, from an economic model point of view, these need facilitation. They need an enabling environment in order to make sure that they can actually go through this valley of death. Here are 3 examples, and we're currently doing many studies more on what does it take to actually create a profitable farmer, this SME version. Under what conditions will he actually have a living income? So 5 outtakes, and then I'm done. Because that was my question. What is the relevance of this whole story for you, or for the work that you will be doing? Well, 5 things. First of all, you cannot be successful in a world that fails. This is not my quote. It's my favorite quote that I stole from the CEO of DSM, which is a life science company, Feike Siebersma. And that means that you need to start taking into account that you need absorption capacity in the sector before you come up with brilliant solutions. And you need to act from a holistic understanding of why is this sector in trouble in the first place, before we start looking for solutions. The other one is working together is a sign of maturity, and that is true for research, it's true for the industry, but you have to understand when it's time to start working together and when we're still in other phases. There's quite destructive if you try to teach math to a baby. It doesn't work. If the sector is still in the project phase or in the competitive phase, then it's less time to work together. But this kind of initiatives is a sign that also around certain topics at least, we're moving towards that 3rd phase. What brought us here will not get us there. Also, so a law of market transformation. If you're in one phase, that strategy will not work in the 2nd phase. Projects will undermine any competitive behavior that you're trying to install. But if you want to work together, then not rewarding competition will undermine that phase. You need to switch gear, just like in a car. When you go to this 1st and to the 2nd to the 3rd gear, you need to know what characteristics are with what phase. Work from the business case, I already said it. Work fact-based. It's not that hard to calculate under what conditions can you actually become profitable. What is the size of his land? What kind of productivity does he need? Therefore, what does it mean for the seeds and the amount of trees? And therefore, what type of farmer do we need? And then you will probably figure out that most of the interventions that we're doing is targeting the wrong target group. More research and access is needed on delivery and the enabling environment. So not just this is a brilliant solution, but how do you actually get it into the field? How do you help the farmer through the valley of death? What are the financial solutions that we probably need to do? What is the insurance solutions here? What is the business case? So this is a very important one. And how to get governments into the field. There's a lot of talk about the farmer, but also about the local governments, and they're hardly taking into account. They're hardly being accountable for their own responsibility. And then finally, perhaps we should think about what to do with the farmers who are clearly not the professional farmers. As long as they are in the game, think of the forces. They will undermine the business case for those who are trying to become more competitive. And this is perhaps the most difficult question and the ethical question. Agriculture currently is the safety net of a failing economy. There are too many people trying to make a living of agriculture, so don't blame agriculture for the fact that there's poverty. People need to get out. We need to work with the farmer of the future. We need to reward quality. There's a role of the government, and the rest needs to do something else. And that is the inconvenient truth, but I'm hoping that that would be part of the research agenda. Thank you so much.